Hello, and welcome to the Frictionless Experience, the podcast where we lay waste to digital friction. I'm Chuck Moxley.
And I'm Nick Palladino.
Today, we're continuing our CXO Suite series where we're not talking to the executive leaders of the companies, but we're talking to the people who are responsible for driving great digital experiences and how they get executive buy-in to deliver better digital experiences. Today, we're talking to Shawn Sheely, who brings a unique background that straddles technology and design, and he's going to be our representative in our CXO series as the CTO, which means continuous technology optimization. Most recently, Shawn served as VP Head of Experience Technology, Shield Design System, and Enterprise Accessibility at US Bank. Now, before US Bank, he worked in consulting, including a stint at Sapient, where he led innovation and digital experience programs for brands like McDonald's and Harley Davidson and Tag Heuer. Today, Shawn is a transformation leader, consultant, and speaker, and he's sharing his experiences in the world of business and technology. Shawn, welcome to the Frictionless Experience.
Thanks, Chuck. Nick, thanks for having me.
Hey, we're glad you're here today. Now, first thing I want to know, tell us about the background. Where are you right now?
Oh, this is the Moto Collective, which is a group of 8 motorcycle enthusiasts, mechanics, a few others, cafe racers of Instagram over in the corner, but a club sort of where we share space, work on motorcycles, we run events, usually have something going on here every week. And we run something called Moto Soda, which is a big gathering, maybe 400 or 500 cyclists at Bauhaus breweries, and where we have bands and all of that. So, and what you see here is my space where I work on my bikes, my racing bikes and my adventure bike. So.
And just to paint a little bit of a picture for our audio listeners, there's a beautiful bike sitting right behind Shawn that's just right here, front and center. So I really encourage everyone to go at least check out a YouTube.
Yeah, a great bike with a sick motor right now, unfortunately, but ready for the season.
and that's why it's up on the shelf right now. Gonna be worked on, huh?
Yeah. Next project.
Cool. That's awesome. Now, I noticed that you started your career in the Air Force. Can you share a little bit about your journey and how it landed you at US Bank?
Wow. Okay. So actually, I was an entrepreneur first. I grew up in a family business, and I started a what we now would call an e-commerce business, but it was a mail order company for bicycle parts. You may see behind me on the other side is a BMX bike. I was a professional BMX racer, and at 18 years old, I started a business doing that. I got the itch to be a pilot and went into the Air Force to get my education and worked as an intelligence analyst. Came out of the Air Force to do another startup, invented a product that was patented, and a couple more startups and partnerships, and mostly around bicycles and motorcycles. And I was a product designer, a product engineer. I guess today we'd call that a design engineer. And realized that as much as I love bikes, I probably should get into something that would give me some longevity. So I got into digital around 2000, and during the course of that, I taught myself to program. Ended up working a lot in interactive and in agencies, and the rest is kind of history. Worked my way up through agencies and had my own agency for 5 years where we built primarily digital signage and installations and did a lot of cutting edge work around early augmented reality, VR, AR, 3D, custom apps for clients like Target and Subaru and folks like that. And eventually worked at Sapient, where I led the innovation team out of Chicago and did technology direction for McDonald's and Harley Davidson, which was fun. And then moved over to US Bank for a challenge there, where we built out the primary challenge there was to insert a design operation within US Bank that didn't exist before under the chief digital officer. And I was brought in to really bridge that gap between design and technology, a design technologist or a design engineer, and build a design system that could serve the entire enterprise through a white label UI system, the coding, the processes, the operations, accessibility, really that whole ball of wax of the customer experience that sits on top of our applications, and to create enterprise-wide reusable design system. Is kind of, I like to say, don't call it a design system, because it's really the foundation of everything that you're doing around customer experience, from code to design. Successful in building out Shield. Was the primary architect for Shield, and um, during various iterations of that project over 5 years, brought that to fruition, where I think it's now a 100-person onshore offshore product team, and engineering, design, product, agile, and doing quite well. So, and then here we are. So,
And what's the meaning of the word shield in that?
Shield is the logo for US Bank, and obviously has some branding connotations around safety, security, and all that. And we'll talk about brand a little later, but that certainly plays a big role in the perception of how customers see the brand. And Shield is really just the way that we've labeled that system as a design system and a architecture of reusable components.
Gotcha. Okay. And I know that you started at US Bank in the design organization and then moved over to technology. How do you approach balancing the technical engineering and the creative design, and how should brands think about that?
Great question. I mean, I've been. It's funny when if you're considered an engineer, you're an engineer, not a designer. But I've been a designer my entire career. Whether that's designing bicycles or if that's designing applications or software. I think that's the biggest challenge for companies today, and it's certainly in something the scale of, say, U.S. Bank, where you have 75,000 employees and hundreds of products, right? You have digital, which is a fairly new entity in a non-digitally native company like U.S. Bank. This isn't the case for Apple or Google. That is their product, right? Um, but when you look at those sort of silos, and how do you connect the two to get a better, just to bring the two together? And I think that's the biggest challenge a lot of companies face right now. Is just that fundamental structure. And so as we did that, I was brought into the design organization under the premise of a design technologist, or we called it design technology. It wasn't well received, let's put it that way, initially. Engineering, which is a very large organization of 7,000 people within the bank, 10% of the company, finding out that this new entity, design, is bringing in somebody with an engineering background to work on UI, was contentious at first. And we had to prove ourselves, right? What we're trying to do is prove ourselves through better product that we were trying to create. The understanding that this design system is an amalgamation. It's bringing the whole reason I got into engineering to begin with is to create great experiences. I was frustrated with designing things that I could not articulate. And back when computers were slow, that meant optimizing your code. That meant having great architecture. That meant pushing boundaries, to make something work great. And so that sort of mentality of that, hey, in order to articulate or to create great brand experiences or customer experiences, that you have to engineer those. I think that's not something that's well embraced in all companies, right? When they don't see that as the product. And so that was the biggest challenge, to be quite honest, was to get design and engineering to work together. Ultimately, I moved over to engineering towards the end of my tenure at US Bank, where we were able to, the scale of that. The idea was, look, if we can do this much with design, imagine what we can do with engineering. So a lot to talk about there, but that's the basic idea, is that you need to bring your designers and your engineers together to create great product. You have beautiful design. If you don't have great code, it's going to fall flat.
Yeah,
I'm
that almost feels like the essence of what product management attempts to do, is kind of bring the practical nature to engineering, while bringing the technical nature to design. And I feel like product management really kind of wraps that up. Was there like a defined product organization over at US Bank, or do you feel like that was kind of where that gap kind of sits?
So product is a fairly new construct there as well.
Right.
If you want to contrast that with business line, right? Originally, that would be called business line. The three different things that I was involved in while at US Bank. One was productizing the design system and all of the reusable UI, and working with accessibility, who is my partner, who's now at DQ, Matthew Lucan. Um, the the product aspect of it is a fairly new construct within the company, and it's certainly now the moniker, right? I mean, everybody's moving to a product model with a quad, if you will, where we have product, agile, engineering, and design. Um, and so the first thing that we set up, and I worked on this for about a year. This was during COVID, I guess, 2020, 21, was to set up our 7 primary products under the CDO and to institute this new product model, which is very quickly adopted across the company. Not just that they were copying us, but that was the mantra. And so we saw that all the way down into engineering. The U.S. Bank is investing about $1 billion, $2 billion a year in infrastructure, right? So product models all over the place for large pieces of their infrastructure. But certainly, and I think that's the real challenge too, is that yes, you can bring that all under the same practice, and in the quad, as we called it, the idea here is that product, engineering, design, and agile all come together and determine what the priorities are and how to manage their teams and how to start rolling features through the products. But for a lot of companies, it's a new construct, and they're still learning how to even operate in that model and who has responsibility. And I think you can kind of think of it this way: is that you have domain level responsibilities, and then you have product level responsibilities. And I think that's the push pull oftentimes, is that design is saying, look, we'll take care of design. And the product manager is saying, no, I want to design product or approve design. I would hear at times, well, engineering works for product, but as a practice across engineering, we need consistency in the way that we approach the work, or we have larger problems. We can't test code. We can't create standards. We can't create consistency. And so I think it's really behooves anybody who's moving to that model to really determine what are the responsibilities at the domain level for design, experience design, and as well for engineering. And in product, obviously, the practice of product, you'll have the head of product, or that each within in a company as large as U.S. Bank, you'll have head of product under each officer underneath the CDO, for example. So, and I think that's really critical, because I think what we found, and I worked with, my leader was Lance Thornswood, who I really loved Lance's approach towards design. That we were going to create great experiences through really looking hard at everything we were doing and making that consistent across the company. That was our mantra. It's going to take a while still to get to that point where everything works the same. But design needs to really take that responsibility. Engineering at the same time needs to create consistency in the way that they approach, because it can become very expensive to have a variety of different testing means or large stacks that are very different in the way that they approach the same problems, because this is business banking and that's consumer banking. These are big challenges. And at the CTO level or the CDO level, those things need to be, I believe, agreed upon and managed at domain level versus product, right? You have to give product the tools to create product and have a feedback channel. But and we can talk more about the details of how that happens in the way that we are able to do that in practice. But I think it's really critical that both of those things are empowered, the product as well as the domain level.
Yeah, no, this resonates so well to a lot of our message in general as the frictionless experience, where we're really trying to unite a lot of these teams into the one common goal. So your example of the quad is exactly what you need to do, because it's talking about how to unite them, and everyone has an equal seat at the table. And it's not what we see traditionally, which is these silos that are independently trying to march towards their agenda as the most important agenda, whether that be product or engineering or design or whoever it is. They're all trying to say, like, this is the most important thing to do. No, it's functionally wrong. The quad is the right way to think about it. So I'm loving that we're talking about this.
It really, in my experience, it requires from the C-suite down that this has to be the mantra. That was one of the biggest challenges we had with the Shield design system, was that we'd never had a mandate. I don't think we were just beginning to prove out the value in this the last couple of years. It was about 100 to 150 million a year in savings that we calculated for just using the system in its infancy. So clearly, when you start looking at the engineering side and that's exponential, big savings, right? So this is beginning to get attention, and now C-suite saying, okay, I think we need to be doing more of this, right? Why aren't we doing things more cohesively. Well, you're not structured that way. Engineering typically is either responsible for maintenance or to build, right? They're not responsible. Well, something that was said to me just before I left the company was we need more architects, right? Everybody has gotten into this engineering management sort of construct, right? You're using a lot of offshore. A lot of times your in-house management, your engineering managers are from offshore. They're former workers for the vendors that were serving the client, right? They know the most about it. You have to stop and determine what your strategy is. What is the objective of all of this? Otherwise, we've all experienced this. You have lots of technical debt, or you have disparate technical solutions. And this is something that US Bank was doing a great job at, which, obviously was spending billions on infrastructure, going to the cloud and building, robust APIs and open banking and, all the different aspects of the business that that is going to create a common methodology towards, or architecture towards, the way you do things. And taken to what you were talking about, which is, everybody sort of having their own agenda, right? Giving product this agenda. And this was a constant push pull. But the bottom line is that has got to come from the C-suite down, right? To say, we're going to operate differently. We're going to take this amount of the budget to spend the next year to determine how we're going to do this company wide. And to create the system, you can't just tell people they're going to do things differently. You have to have a process where you involve them in the evolution of that process. And that's a big part of innovation. Innovation never works if you just dictate it, right? You have to involve those who are involved and listen to them and understand what their needs are, take that back and solve for that, and then provide the tools and the communication channels.
And inspire. It's all about inspiring others to feel empowered to do it on their own and just be self-motivated.
Yeah, and I think, well, that's the thing. If you don't define this, right? If you don't really determine what your common objectives are going to be, or what the outcomes are that you're going to do, or have, I like to think of it in abstract solutions, right? In an abstract architecture, I've got my APIs here, I've got my applications there, my databases, my UIs. All of this needs to be thought about at an abstract level. So when you provide that to them, they've got the tools, and that's inspiring, right? That we've thought of this, we provided these means for you to do this. Then you can get people to buy in. And change is hard, no matter what, right? Whether that's just an obstinance for fear of change, or if that's, personal agendas. So you have to plow through that. And the only way to do that is to put your head down and define how this is going to work.
Remember that book, Don't Move My Cheese? That's what it reminds me of.
I've been working in innovation a long time. There's a lot of people who don't like their cheese moved.
So when you came in and brought in this design system, this design way of thinking, there must have been a lot of friction that you uncovered in that process, right? And maybe two sides of friction. One is friction in the user experience, right? And the journey that the customers were taking, but probably friction in the organization on that side too. Talk a little bit about that. Maybe give some examples.
Well, I'll talk about obviously, I don't need to go real deep on this. This isn't unique to US Bank or any other company. I mean, I've worked with a lot of large companies trying to make fundamental change. And, everybody understands that dynamic and what it takes to change and to get that there. And we just discussed some of the ways that you can implement that. To the second part of the question, which I'll answer more directly, which is changing that mindset about how valuable experience is, or your customer experience. I think we kind of all get wrapped up in this thing that we're here to build something and get it out the door so that people can use it, right? And so if you look at something the size of US Bank, with hundreds of products, each product owner, or there was 4 primary areas of the business. You've got corporate, small business or business, and consumer, and then internal, right? Employee. Everybody has their own agenda. That change really takes what you alluded to earlier, which is getting everybody kind of driving towards the same agenda because they feel involved. That is really challenging because everybody's moving at a different pace and a different mindset. How do you get everybody there? But the way that we approach it was, well, we need to have a design function within the bank. We went from basically any product team would just go out and hire their own designers, or a lot of times programmers would just do the design work, right? It was very sort of, when I first joined the company 5 years ago, it was very undefined. And it was clear that they needed a design function and they needed a CDO office to run all of that. They brought in Derek White, who was, what was it, BNC, or he was with in Europe, and he had the right mindset for where we were going with this, and set up, so he stood up a CDO operation, design, and this is before product even, right? We were just, let's start with consumer. I was actually at Sapient when we sold the work to US Bank on the consumer side. But back to design and experience, you have to first of all show that there's value in this process to have design involved at this level. At the same time, we're working on the plane while we're flying, because there is no established design standard. There's a brand. Don't confuse brand with design. Nobody's looked at an application and said, "Hey, this would work a lot better." We were building an application. We were building a mobile app that wasn't all that great prior to that, right? That's why we were brought in. So I think we were 25 people initially. I was the 5th design director, and accessibility, operations, creative director, and technical, and another creative director. We had to define what that experience was going to be for our customers. And that was the biggest challenge. The internal stuff kind of just, as we encountered different entities within the bank, to say, hey, now we're going to make sure everybody uses a button this way. That was a different conversation to have. But defining how primarily we wanted things to function, for example, input fields, you type your name in. The decision was made by the head of design that we wanted to use float labels. We thought that was graceful, easy to use, but that's not the way most input fields come out of the box. So it requires customization. So that was the initial point of friction. Well, how do we build that, right? Eventually, 3 years later, I built all of that with my teams, with the engineering team I had under me, so that we could manage that from the design system. But initially, it was a very big change, right? So now we've got typical box type input fields in some places and float labels on the mobile app. And how do you manage all that? So that sort of change itself, when you're really moving to more of a enterprise-wide experience as part of the brand, is a bigger challenge probably than the friction that you're going to get internally, but due to politics, organization structure, whatever, right?
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that was great. That's great. So you've worked in your career, you've worked with a lot of different screens and screen sizes. You've mentioned kiosk. You've obviously done a lot of mobile. You talked about app. What are the challenges that you have with those smaller screens, or those different screens that you maybe don't see in the desktop world that you have to adapt for?
Well, I mean, everybody knows, trying to get more functionality out of a smaller screen is challenging, right? And I think we did start with the mobile app before we even went to web. And I think that was really helpful, because it forced us, in the consumer product in particular, which is a great team of designers and product and everybody who's running that operation, to kind of force that sort of paring down of the experience, because everybody wants to do more, and then you realize you're in this little bitty screen, and you've got but what that drove us towards were patterns, and I think that's experience patterns is what we call them. And because you've done this over and over again. If I'm going to collect your name and address, I've done that a million times, right? So it really drove us towards simplicity, and of course, simple design is beautiful, and functional design is helpful, is useful. So yeah, getting to the smaller screen space, lots of well, the first couple of weeks I joined, the problem we were having is, and this is another part that we wanted to talk about, is accessibility. US Bank is the top consumer product application offering for people with needs for accessibility, based on results from DQ University and Forrester. And even with that, I mean, DQ would be and we can still do better, right? But the point is, what we were having a problem with is when you increase the text size on your device, you go into accessibility settings, you're like, hey, I need larger text. When I don't have my reading glasses on, I want larger text. That forces you to realize that, oh, we designed this headline to be one line, and now it's going to wrap. And it's not only is going to wrap, it could just go completely vertical. Where do we want to cut that off? So now we've realized we had to set rules on, well, what does an H1 or a headline text, how far are we going to have that wrap before we set a block on that and say that's big enough? So we had to, through code, control how we were going to implement the standard, which, by the way, is not established for mobile. It's established for web, the WCAG standard that you follow. So all of those things become a larger conversation around what are we going to implement? And then you're bringing in risk, compliance, governance, everybody to weigh in on this. You start to peel back the layers of the onion as you're trying to define how things should work. So working with that mobile screen first forced us into those simpler patterns to establish a framework for how to determine things like accessibility, how things should be programmed in order to make sure that the screen readers are working properly. We very quickly came in with voice assist, which also sort of complicated that. But you begin to create a framework and rules in which you can work, and everybody begins to understand everybody else's role and why these things are important. So once we went to web, I would honestly say that going from that small screen to that screen was less of a challenge. We set a couple breakpoints. We were basically doing tablet and desktop, figuring that, hey, if you're any smaller than this, you're on a phone, right? And even for that, it's native, not responsive within the phone apps.
Gotcha. So it's interesting when we talk about and we think about friction, and friction has a cost to it, right? When somebody, and we talk a lot in retail examples. So, we're working with brands like Staples, Dick's Sporting Goods, Lowe's. When we think about a consumer encountering friction in their purchase transaction, something that prevents them from completing that transaction, the cost is they'll go to a competitor and complete the transaction there. Banking is really a very different world, right? Because the switching costs are high. Once you've got a checking account set up or a savings account set up, you're not going to just switch banks because you get a lot of friction, doing it. How are you guys thinking about that and even quantifying some of that and the goals and KPIs to measure that friction and how you are accomplishing that in a banking world?
I think that's a great question, and certainly with banking, the way I looked at it, I can't speak for the company as a whole. From a certain perspective, the way I see it is, and one of the reasons I joined the bank, I'm all about financial independence and controlling your finances and enabling people to be able to do that. And so the bank opportunity came up, and it was a good fit for me personally. And that is that with US Bank, the brand is trust. Okay, I trust you with my money. You've got my money. You've got my mortgage. Well, first I'm going to have you save my money. Then I'm going to take my mortgage with you. So it's this progressively more invested relationship between the two of you, between the consumer and the brand itself. Whereas with a consumer company, yeah, I mean, or any CPG, retail brand, whatever it happens to be, yeah, I can jump over to the competitor, and because I got blocked here and I couldn't do this, I'm not invested in any way, right? Unless maybe they've got a reward program or something. So the way that we looked at it as a whole, I would say from a leadership point of view, that we owed this to our customers, not just from that relationship, but that if we're going to do this, we need to do it right. And I'll give you an example. Under accessibility, Matthew Lucan, who is now at DQ, the head for accessibility design, head of design accessibility, created a great presentation that showed how much of a market there is for people who have disabilities that need banking services, where everybody needs banking services, right? And why it was important for us. And it's in the billions of dollars, right? To serve that audience that, you could look at that as a compliance checkbox, or you can say, look, if we serve these people, we bring business in. And, in banking, the money is made on mortgages, right? Everybody knows this, right? That's the big chunk. But you first have to get them in the door. And so when we look at how we look at that customer from the first time, we wanted them to have a great experience. If you needed assistive technology in order to get through an onboarding process, we wanted that to work seamlessly, right? That's the frictionless experience of saying, I came in here, I applied for a savings account or whatever, and back to your mobile screen. How few of clicks can I do? We did find that we could get some of these experiences down to a third of the amount of content in a single screen and have it accessible and have, a very quick result. that got the customer to the next step. So I would say, to your question, we looked at the entirety of all of that and the value in that. Then we started to measure it. Obviously we measure things, but we really began to measure our onboarding process, which in the past really wasn't a great investment of time and effort. But my team focused on building all of the input fields that it takes to do that. And I can tell you that 3 years later, they reduced costs by 70% and increased onboarding by, I think, the same amount, 70%, and completion rates went through the ceiling, or through the roof. And all of a sudden, we're bringing more customers in, which means we're starting to build trust. And the next stage is to go from car loan, then from car loan to mortgage, and now that's actually a new customer channel, right? That didn't exist before, because we simplified the process, we made sure it worked, and that there was no place where that fell off, and we measured it, and now that team, I just heard, is getting some of the largest parts of the budgets this year, because they're getting results. And that's what it takes to get there, right? But there's huge value to the company in respect to that.
That's such a great way to think about friction, because it really highlights that friction is meeting your customers where they are, which is something that we've heard before. Because for many of these customers, accessibility is paramount for them to be able to complete their transaction, and that is a frictionless experience. For most people, that's not necessary. But for those that it is necessary, they're going to go out and seek out the most frictionless experience that they can, and that opens up a whole new market. Now, think about that at a non-accessibility level. It also matters for each of your other customers too, because they are thinking about their own little box. What does their box of success look like? What does their box of frictionlessness look like? Yeah. Accessibility or non-accessibility, or I guess that's not the right way to say it, but accessibility as a feature set allows you to target a whole new market. And that is just such a great way to be thinking about it, because it's opening up both a individualized friction definition and helping us understand how to just help people.
Well, and back to the design system, I mean, it's why you want to have a design system and you want to have reusable code. You don't have to solve this problem over and over again, or have this as a target for offshore to be able to meet, right? First, set your standards. Which browsers am I using? Which WCAG standard am I using? What is my accessibility standard? These are the components. This is the way they work. If I type in my name, I can't type in a letter. I can't, all of that sort of minutia of the experience, right? To get, and the right feedback if I did it right, I did it wrong. If that's accessibility, what we had is the ability for it to read back and say, no, there was an error. Here, let me get you back focused to this. That, the entirety of all of that is, all of our customers are improved by that. And accessibility is when I first joined, it was seen as sort of a compliance problem, right? Well, let's check the box. Let's make sure we submitted the record. Once we started showing that this had value, it would be no different than, we added Spanish as a second language, because that's a huge market. And, here in Minnesota, where a lot of our customers are, very diverse, one of the most diverse areas of the country, here in Minneapolis, with not just Spanish speakers, but probably 6 other languages, right? It was just the first. And so that sort of thing of, like, if you're going to build it, just build it to work, right? Build it to, build it to the standard, and then go to offshore and say, this is our standard that you need to test to. And this is the way. And we were finding great success with that, especially with the design system teams that we had building out product for other product teams. Once we had our onshore team understanding this is the way we build, and these are the standards we build to, and this is how we test, just smooth, right? But if you have these sort of disparate standards, if it's browser standards or WCAG standards, or somebody's not doing their compliance testing, or, the governance records are just sort of a checkbox as well. If something's too difficult or it's ambiguous, people are going to just skirt around it. If you just address it head on and say, we're going to do these things, and these are the values. These, again, back to the C-suite, is what Matthew Lucan was really great at doing, was saying, this is an incredible opportunity to capture a huge part of the market that's, basically underserved, because nobody else is doing this. And if we do this, these are the numbers. And here's the other value that comes out of that. And then we come into the design system and say, here's the value of, once that's done, the predictability, the consistency. And now as we go into things like AI, that you can just plug in different experiences, huge, huge value.
Yeah, you said a lot there, really, because I hadn't thought about when I was thinking about banking. I think about entrenched customers, but in that acquisition standpoint, from that very beginning, that being a positive experience, the fact that you could tie a 70% increase in onboarding rate, that speaks directly to the C level, right? That's the metrics they look at because that's revenue, that's additional customers, that's growth, and the lifetime value of those customers could be very huge, right? So financially, that could be a big piece to it. And then you also mentioned the consistency in B2B marketing, which is obviously what I work in. One of the frustrations is when one company acquires another, like Salesforce goes and acquires, and you're working in the product, and the way you do it in this part of the product works completely different than this part of the product because they haven't brought the design standards over and standardize that. And it gets really frustrating from a user standpoint because you have
It,
to remember 5 different ways to do things.
no, Salesforce. I mean, I'll be honest. I typically skirted teams that were trying to figure out how to react to Salesforce's changes or different platforms. But this is another place I think where, to become frictionless, if you will, we talked earlier about the product teams we set up. I'll run through those real quick. One was the Shield design system and engineering teams as a product, right? The others were those centralized functions that you have within your company where you come up with disparate solutions. You look at Salesforce, but think about Dropbox and Box and all these other document upload services, right? We had stuff everywhere at the bank, right? Every product team had their own solution for documents. Again, you go back to the customer, we're onboarding them, and we say, hey, by the way, we need the title to your house or the title to your car or whatever it happens to be, right? Some legal document. Like, geez, I just uploaded that to this. To them, they don't see the distinction between all these different entities within a product within the bank. It's supposed to be one product, right? And so we took that as a product document upload. And we created an API system on the back end and we built our own document system. And I was leading the design on that team as well as working closely with engineering. I was head of design for those product teams. And, we created this configurable, consistent, reliable way to put an application in front of the customers that every time they uploaded a document, they could see what they've uploaded previously. And when they do go to upload something, it's the exact same interface they used last time to upload something. And this worked across the bank as a product. It was the most successful product that we had built up to that point where it was like, look, when we do this, this can be amazing. And even the CDO said, we've got to do everything like this, right? We had a lot of people on board that product team who were thinking along the same lines of, okay, we're going to decouple these pieces. And then we still supported Box and Drop, all these other sort of previous services we had purchased, much like Salesforce. How do you plug in all these other things? The other products in that line were authentication. So all of the authentication for the entire bank would run through that team. They would build all the UI for that. They would manage all the APIs, everything, which rightly so. And then profile and preferences. So all of your profiles, preferences, everything that you have within the company, standardize that. Everybody uses the same product. It's configurable. It's just a bunch of extensible patterns. And figuring all those out in simple form. And then the onboarding team, right? So now when you encounter the bank, you don't see multiple products. You see one. You see the product that we've created from an experience point of view, and your trust is good. You know how it works. You know how to move through it. It happens quickly. Oh, you already filled this in. Let me pre-populate that for you. Here's your documents. Consistency of experience.
That's a great example of frictionless. I love it.
And it's so simple. Like, it's how you would think about the experience it should be. It's so simple from like just an approach standpoint, but it's so complicated to actually deliver.
Not only is it complicated to deliver, but back to your previous question, from an organizational point of view, it's extremely complicated to take. Hey, we're going to now take all of your document upload features and you're going to use our product, or you're going to use this login team. That was a huge challenge. And I don't want to get into that, but, certainly worked with all those teams, and I worked across the enterprise. I got to see it all. A lot of pushback. We'll take care of this ourselves like we always did. Okay, well, and then the next year, let's do this again. Keep folding them in. Finally, with document upload, I believe that was being done with one of the investment branches had that as a project, and we just said, okay, we're taking that and we're pulling it all together. And it wasn't a popular decision, but it ultimately created a great product.
That's awesome. So, Shawn, what's a widely held belief about building frictionless experiences that you fundamentally disagree with?
Wow. Well, that any one person can know what that ideal experience is, right? The sort of collaborative function or the culmination of all of these different aspects. Um, I and I think that's sort of a legacy, you know, prior to the product model as we looked at business lines. I think, well, you'll hear this. You'll hear, well, no, I know my customers. I know my customers, right? Um, mortgage is sort of we never really touched mortgage because it's such a key part of the business, and they do know their customers, right? They know their business, but to sort of come in and say, well, there's a lot of aspects to this, right? Like let's look at research and let's look at why don't if you used our products within your product, this would be better. And so anyway, I think that's sort of maybe it's more of a legacy view, that myopic view that the product business line owner knows more than everybody else. It takes a village, right? So, like I was saying earlier, if each domain really has put the attention into building things in a way that is the most seamless in the way that I can implement it, and that it makes sense, or that that entity can work with us. For example, corporate, when we first started doing interfaces with them, they moved some of the largest amounts of money under. They're one of the largest movers of money for the federal government, right? There's huge double screen interfaces that they build out for people that basically like trading platforms, right? The name eludes me right now, but it's basically a federal interface. And we took them the design system and we said, well, hey, here's how this works, right? You use a red button. We use the red button, right? And we've already defined how the button should work. And then we say their button's red, and they said, geez, that red button staring at us all day, 8 hours a day is really annoying. We want it to be orange. We're like, that's not on brand. So, I'll give you even a better example. We spent a lot of time redoing our teller interfaces, and we didn't. This project kicked off before really design was involved. It was again another product team working within the branch. I've done a lot of what we call out of home, or work with McDonald's for like their drive-throughs and things like that, right? So things where even my agency was called analog, which meant, hey, digital needs to interface with the analog world. So we're redoing the teller interface, but we hadn't done enough research at that point. The project was already going when I joined the company, and they launched it, and the tellers were really upset because they use the 10 key, right? They don't even think about it, right? This is, it's just an extension there, blah, 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 with their hands, right? Well, every time they hit the tab key, it moves to the next field, and they've got to take a mouse and they've got to do all. It was driving them crazy, right? So that idea that you have to involve that product team into the objective, and you have to listen to them. You have to have means for saying, hey, look, it works different here. So how are we going to adapt the design system? And the way that I looked at that was, well, I'm going to abstract that to a button is a button, right? And now I'm going to give you a variant of that does a particular thing, a particular way that you need it. Functionally, it's different, but fundamentally, foundationally, it's all bred from the same seed, right? That's a really big challenge, and to have that kind of commitment to work with those people to say, hey, I'm taking your view, but I need you to work with me to help refine our view. So I think that's the biggest problem. This idea that somebody has a grand vision for something. Even within my role there, I was at times when people would push back, they say, well, you're opinionated. And I'm saying, my only opinion is that I want to make sure that we're accounting for everything, right? The opinion is like, what is the truth? What is objectively true in the way that this works? Or what is the means in which we can reach the objective truth?
That's awesome. So, Shawn, final question. What are 2 or 3 recommendations that listeners can take back to their jobs immediately and put to work based on this conversation?
Wow. Well, I think the most important thing, and I said this all the time, was that you need to really explain to leadership what great experience, or in your cases, we talk about frictionless. Why is this? Where's their value in this? What is the value in this? And so the way that you do that is that, let's say that you're listening to this and you work within a product team, and you have designers, you have engineers. I think the best thing that you can do is get those engineers and designers sitting next to each other first, right? And getting them iterating. Be willing to not just say, this is my design, build it, right? But have a clear, designers are going to design and engineers are going to code. But if you have a clear objective across your team as to what you want that outcome to be, what would be a great outcome for our customers? You asked previously what our mantra was at the bank. It was always customer first, right? If we can all agree that the customer will have a great experience when this happens, and then I can roll out more features or more products to them within this set, right? I can build a backlog of things and I can test them and see if they work. If you're not doing that already, start thinking about really, as we talk about design system, we're talking about experience. Let me put it this way. Designers, if you think of a art director, designer, purely in this form, we had another role within the design team called information architects. And this has sort of been a term that's been kicked around a lot. But this idea that you're doing service design or you're doing design that's not visual design, right? You're designing experience. I think that's where teams can take away some of this immediately and say, look, how can we make this easier for our customers? And that starts with defining, I call it the spine. You take this spine, you say, this is from the beginning of the experience to the end of the experience. This is what the customer needs to do. And the question is, at each aspect of that, okay, these are the APIs. This is the back end where the data goes. We all know that. Once the customer starts working with it here, who needs to be involved, right? Is this research, design, engineering? Okay, let's solve this problem. That's what we did with this document upload product. I said, well, okay, we have two customers. One is the person who's implementing the application. The other was the customer who's using it. So let's make it easy to implement. So there's basically a configuration file. You go through, there's an interface where you check all the boxes, click a button, gives you a configuration file. You can use the application. The customer side, I only show them what they need so I can come in with a profile. When you break that functionality down in that way, and back to your question, get each team working on those harder issues and solving for them. And back to the question we just answered around the larger problem, the mindset. It's not one person who's going to decide that. The product owner shouldn't be making this decision. It's not a democracy. It's a iterative solution. This is the framework we're going to use. Here's how we're going to hang everything off the spine, right? And here's the loop back to how we're going to do this in an agile way. I think that's the big thing. Get your mindset into, how do I define this in a way that I have everybody aligned with that objective, right? This clears the clutter out. We were very successful doing this with this document upload product. We never went to full color design. We started first of all with schematics and wireframes, and then we'd prove that out, right? We'd meet with engineering again, or they're in the calls. We're working together to say, does that make sense? No, this is over here, right? And when you do this, I did this with my agency. We would spend weeks doing that type of work. The coding didn't take long after that because we had the systems. This design system I brought to US Bank is just an extension of what I had built previously back when I worked in Flex and Flash and some other frameworks. That's not the hard part. You're just implementing design at that point. But being able to sit down and say, okay, we're very clear on where all the parts go. Now you go in and you code that and you build it. Or if there's something that needs to be proven, you take that aside and you prove it and build it. That sort of approach of saying we're all aligned to the same objective, the end of the spines, if you will, and how are we going to get there, and how are we going to keep everybody involved in that as we go? That is going to create a much more streamlined experience. It's going to give you a much more flexible product, and it may not be the epitome of an amazing design system and an amazing application, but it's going to give you foundationally, you're going to have solved the primary problem. So you have a very strong foundation to build upon.
That's awesome. This has been a great conversation, Shawn. Thank you. Where can listeners find and interact with you?
I've been on hiatus for the last, I don't know how many months, which has been enjoyable. So I don't currently have a web presence other than LinkedIn, and you're certainly welcome to find me there. Shawn Sheely, it's LinkedIn. linkedin.com/Shawn Sheely.
Okay, great. Well, we'll put a link in the show notes as well. So thanks for tuning in to this episode of The Frictionless Experience. Remember to follow us on your favorite podcast player apps. You can automatically receive notifications when new episodes are uploaded. Also, be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts and let us know what you think and what topics you want us to cover in future episodes. We're happy to cover anything that might be causing you friction. And of course, you can always find and connect with me and Nick on LinkedIn.